Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm Curator of Education, Anna Smith, and today we are happy to share an opportunity to become better acquainted with the work of artist Maren Hassinger, whose work has explored connections between politics, communities, and the environment through dance, performance, video, and sculpture. The Nasher has had the great fortune to acquire one of Hassinger's sculptures, titled Field, through the Kalita A. Doolan Acquisitions Fund for Women Artists. This complex and thought-provoking sculpture will be on view at the Nasher through September of 2021 as part of an exhibition titled Nasher Mixtape, curated by curator Catherine Kraft. We will begin today's program with a short video contextualizing Field through the artist's own powerful words, then begin a live conversation between Maren Hassinger and Catherine Kraft. We welcome your questions, which you may submit through the chat feature of this platform. And now, let's begin.
We are all related. The problems that we associate with life here on Earth are problems that are caused by our inability. I don't know what our problem is really, but by our inability to see each other as one. If I'm thinking that we are all related and that we are as one thing that we all share is nature. I think that my use of nature probably happened because I figured we would all understand what that was and what it means and how we all somehow stemmed from that. When we think about Adam and Eve and the Garden of Eden, a story that is shared by many, many, many peoples and cultures. There was a garden, and that was the beginning. The way I know how to talk about being alive is by making what people call art. I was a performance artist and continue to make performances, and I worked with lots of other people on performances. And so I did live action things, and I did more traditional sorts of sculptures, things that were three-dimensional, and some kind of combination of those things in installations. And throughout it all, I've been really trying to explain what it's like to be alive to myself and, the people who look at my work. I use the material called wire rope to make most of my sculptures that deal with the issues of nature. And I do this because it looks like something growing. It looks as if it's being blown by currents of the wind. It looks as if it's been ravaged by some disease. It looks as if it's sturdily growing in spite of all the elements that would be against its growth. It looks natural to me, even though it's wire and even though it's rope, all of which is manufactured. In the piece Field, the wire rope is mounted onto concrete blobs. That started out being in a show, and I remember holding my son, who at that point was under 1 year old, and my daughter was there. She was probably about 2.5. I remember looking at the work and thinking that it looked better than I thought it was supposed to look. I remember looking at it and going, wow, that looks pretty good. And then later on, the curator of that show sold the work, and I was happy about that too. And it was sold to a public collection. And then I sort of lost track of it. My life went on. My kids grew up. I taught graduate school for many years in Baltimore. Time really went on. I mean, like maybe 30 or 40 years. And the Nasher contacted me and said, we're thinking of acquiring your piece from, way back when. And well, how did you get it? So that whole story went. And then they sent me pictures of its reincarnation, and I was very pleased to see that really nothing had changed. And I was shocked about that too. But you are looking at really the original thing that was made, 40 years ago, and it still looks like something swept by the wind, and it's still something that I'm happy that I made, and hope that you will enjoy it.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Catherine Kraft. I'm a curator at the Nasher Sculpture Center. And if you're just joining us or joined us a bit late, you were just seeing a film about a new work that the Nasher Sculpture Center has acquired and that we just put on view. It's a sculpture entitled Field by Maren Hassinger. And I am delighted to have the artist, Maren Hassinger, here for a conversation for a bit this evening, and hopefully there will be some time left at the end for questions. So if you have anything you'd like to ask, please put them into the chat, and we'll be checking those as the evening draws to a close. So welcome, Maren.
Thank you. I'm really happy to be here, and I'm so happy that you took care of my work so well. I mean, it's older than many people, and it looks so nice and fresh, like it just happened,
Well, and I have to, that's a perfect time to give a call out to our conservator, Claire Taggart, who worked diligently to clean the wire and the cement blocks into which the wires insert. But really, the piece was intact and just needed a little attention and getting it arranged and placed in the right order. And I'm thrilled that we've been able to revive it. And also, it's going to be on view for quite some time. So I hope at some point, if not in the immediate future, I hope at some point you're able to come and see it in person.
Oh, I will. I'll make a point of it. It's really quite shocking to see something after so long, like it was way back. Yeah.
Yeah, and because the work was on view in a gallery show, and then I believe at the in a group show called the Decade Show, which was at the New Museum, the Studio Museum, and the Museum of Contemporary Hispanic Art, which no longer exists. But and that was a really tremendous show. And then that sounds like the last time you heard anything about it, since it disappeared into this collection. One of the things I'd like to maybe start with is just sort of your early years as a sculptor and how you came to make sculptural work, because it was not a straightforward path. And you grew up in Los Angeles, is that right?
Yeah, born and raised. Went to LA High. My mother had gone to LA High. So, we grew up in the same neighborhood, my mother and I. So, I mean, it was pretty much home. And then, and then there was Bennington College, which was totally different. Totally different.
What brought you to Bennington College on the other side of the country?
Well, I wanted to be a dance major, and it had one of the best, if not the best, rated dance department in higher education. And I liked that it was in the country. I liked that there were no grades. I liked that the classes were tiny. I liked that you could see your instructors once a week if you wanted to, that you could have a counselor that was one of your instructors. And it was just beautiful countryside, So I did it. And it really started me on my way. Actually, I'm not too far from the person who went there looking for a major in dance, oddly. Even though I don't do that, but the whole thing,
What happened when you got to Bennington that you ended up working in sculpture instead of in dance?
Well, they had this thing that they did where you had a counselor and you saw your counselor every week. And my counselor was the accompanist for the dance department and also the husband of the ballet teacher. And he told me at one point when I was getting ready to, apply for dance, that I wasn't good enough. But the art department had given me very good comments. We didn't have grades, we had written comments. And I was devastated. I was really, really devastated. I think for maybe a year or more even. I mean, I'm thinking about it now. I feel like I'm still devastated. But my savior out of all of this really was Isaac Whitkin, who now is right next to me. And object-wise in the space. I mean, it's just so poignant to me. It's so, so touching that the man who said I could get my shapes up pretty good is, now I'm sharing a room with him.
Yeah, actually, I think,
and our work doesn't look anything alike.
Right. I think we might have an image. That we could see for a moment. So there's your sculpture next to Isaac Whitkin's sculpture called Volution from 1964. Just to give people it went by in the film pretty quickly. So thanks for sharing that image. But I think it's interesting. I think it's just such a nice sign of encouragement, and also I knew a little bit of that story before, and I thought it was it's so nice to hear a story about encouragement, because that is not always the case when people go to school. But that he was so supportive of you and your efforts. What kind of work were you making when you were at Bennington or when you left?
It was pretty much, as you might expect the work to look like at the time. It was constructed out of wood and painted. It was in parts. One of the pieces that I really liked during that time, or in my show that you have to make an exhibition at the end, was a piece that was beige in color. It had 3 separate parts that were sort of linked they weren't attached, but they were linked because of their closeness to one another and their shapes, which were basically geometric shapes. So they were like primary structures, really, but they didn't have the scale of some of the, or some of the works that you might associate with that movement. They weren't like, they were more the scale of like an Anthony Caro, as opposed to, the expansive, endless things that we're accustomed to these days. And the thing is, like, Isaac came from a very different background. He, prior to coming to the United States, he was in South Africa, and he then went to London to study art, and then he came to Bennington, and he was just a very lovely, charming and supportive and kind, very kind person. He was very kind to me. And he let me know that if I wanted to be an artist, I could be an artist. Whereas the dance department was absolutely pounding on the table, no, never, never. And the thing is, but movement became such a big part of everything that I did. And because performance work became popular at the time, I did dance. I mean, some people probably know a lot about the work that I did in collaboration with Sangan and Judy. And all of the work that I did on my own that was videoed and in celebration of movement. I did all of that stuff because I had to move. And that was even after I was told absolutely not by people who knew, So it's been being an artist, or being me, I'm not going to put it on everybody, but being me, it's had some really sad and low points, which I tried to rectify to make myself feel deserving, I think. Yeah.
Oh, I think one of the things that's extraordinary about the work you've made is the way it moves between these sort of different poles of activity, from sculptural objects to performance and dance, and also video. And it seems to me your next step, I mean, you went to graduate school at UCLA, which first of all, I think you would not have thought about doing that if you hadn't ended up having, such a solid and encouraging experience in the sculpture department and with Isaac Witkin. And then how was your experience at UCLA?
Well, that was fraught with peril also, because I went there trying to be a sculpture major, trying to get an MFA in sculpture.
Yeah, understandably.
Right. I mean, I had the pat on the back from one of the, extraordinarily gifted and recognized people of the time. So I put my application in and it was rejected. But somehow or another, I guess at the meeting where they were looking at all the candidates, a man named Bernard Kester, who was starting a new program in fiber structure, called me. I don't even remember how it happened. I guess he got my phone number and called me and asked me if I would be interested in a fiber structure MFA. And I didn't even know what it was. And I'd never really done anything with fiber. I hadn't sewn anything even. I just, all foreign. But I knew I wanted to get an MFA because I knew I wanted to be an artist. And I knew if I didn't get an MFA, I wouldn't be able to teach. So I would starve to death. So to my mind, that was really a welcome invitation. And so I said yes. And then when I started the class, we started off talking about weaving and learning how to warp a loom and all of that. And I was really very anxious about all of that. And I was like, I didn't want to do that. That was too much. I don't know if you've ever warped a loom, but
no,
it is
I haven't.
tedious. And, if you make a mistake, it's a disaster. It's a disaster for me, So, but I did learn how to do it. And then it progressed to making off the loom works. And then it progressed to, because the MA program was just a year. So I asked him, I said, I need to have this MFA to teach. And he said, okay. So I ended up staying 3 years altogether. So we became very close. He was a wonderful person. He was so supportive. And it was fun being in his class. And I met some lovely people who were my co-students. And I just kind of combined everything I had learned in undergraduate about form and materials with everything I learned from Bernard about form and materials and fiber structure. And I just moved on. And I didn't call what I did fiber. I just called it generically, well, it's sculpture. And I just moved on. And I, applied to, granting and teaching jobs and everything that dealt with three-dimensional work, sculptural work. So I can never really say, even though my graduate degree is in fiber structure, I extended the fiber structure to wire rope, which is, formed like rope, but entirely steel and weldable, and all the things that you can do to a sheet of steel, you can do to a piece of wire rope. Yeah.
How did you encounter that material? Because it seems like it's not an art material, but it seems like a perfect kind of hybrid between the worlds of fiber and the kind of sculptural structure you're talking about.
It is. I mean, when I think about it, I go, wow, that was a funny thing to find, because I found it. I was on Alameda Street in Los Angeles. It's where all the salvage yards are. And I was just kind of going around, looking around in these yards, going to, the backest of the backyards. And I just saw this piece of wire rope thrown down. It was all cranked and, messed up and falling apart and opening up and dirty and rusty and awful. I don't even know how I touched it. Maybe I had gloves on, but I picked it up and I looked at it and I went, wow, that's really interesting because it's totally fiber and it's totally steel. So, and then, I did research and I found out about the bridges, and the Brooklyn Bridge, of course, it was made to make the Brooklyn Bridge. So,
the wire rope, that's where it is. Yeah, that's wonderful.
Yeah. So, I think about that, of course, a lot, especially being here.
Here I should say, I don't think we've mentioned you're in New York City, but
right.
Yes. One thing I was wondering, just from having seen our preparators, our art handlers and conservator handling the wires for your sculpture at the Nasher, is it's pretty unforgiving material. I mean, were you able to work it by yourself? Or how did you
Most
actually?
of the time, yeah,
Yeah.
because I didn't force it to do anything it didn't want to do. I couldn't. That
Right.
would be impossible. And I didn't want it snapping back on me, because a slap in the face with something like that would be, devastating. So I wore gloves and I pried open the plies with a giant screwdriver or a belaying pin. And, I was just careful. The worst part was trying to cut it on my own. I had this thing that looked like a guillotine, and I actually hired a friend to help me cut it all up to do a particular piece. And all of us were going crazy with the racket in our arms and chest, and it was terrible. So a lot of times after that, then I asked the people that I bought the wire rope from to cut it for me. Like I would plan a piece and then I'd ask them to cut it because they had all the equipment.
Right.
And it really be, with a 10-pound or 20-pound sledgehammer. Just, it was ridiculous.
So were you exploring what you could do with this material at the same time as you were starting to explore performance with this group of friends and colleagues and associates? Did the two things develop kind of in tandem or in parallel?
So you're asking if when I was in graduate school, whether the friends I made there, did we all kind of work on wire rope, or did we?
Or maybe more like during graduate school, but also after, when you were making you're making sculptures with using wire rope, but you're also involved with performance, and you do, for example, the ceremonies for freeway fetes, I think.
Oh yeah,
yeah. And other kind of public or private performances. Were those two? I was just trying to understand, like, were those kind of activities on separate tracks, or were they really kind of intersecting with each other?
Yeah, they kind of intersect with each other, although the themes might not seem like they were intersecting. But because I had always initially wanted this dance career, I took a lot of dance classes, not at Bennington College, but when I got back to LA, after I finished my graduate degree, after I got my MFA in fiber structure, I started taking dance classes. And I began to take some dance classes from people I had taken from when I was in high school. They were still around and about, and they were still working and teaching. And that was people who worked with Lester Horton Dance Company. And he was the first choreographer who had an integrated dance company in the 50s. And people like Carmen de Lavalade, who are well-known dancers in New York, and her sister Yvonne were in that company, and Lelia Goldoni, who was a dancer in that company and also an actor in Hollywood. They became my teachers, and Yvonne and Lelia became my teachers. And I don't know, I took a lot of dance classes from them, also ballet classes, even from this very famous woman, Carmelita Marachi. And I just, and performance was something that was, art performances were happening. They were in the air, and I participated in Sanga's work and she and mine. And then we had a group of people, Ulysses Jenkins and Franklin Parker. And there were just a bunch of us who did that. I mean, we just did it. It was in the air. And it felt very comfortable, and I was really happy with it. I was really happy, having a studio where I could make sculptures and being able to go to dance class and being able to have friends who, Sanga would say, "Oh, let's get these nylons." And I recently saw a performance that Frank, Ulysses, and I did. It was a trio,
Mm-hmm.
and Sanga directed us, and it was about the eternal triangle, a woman and two guys. The two guys are vying for her attention, and the woman is acting very coy, and we were all so young. It was almost hard to recognize us. It was fantastic. It was beautifully directed, and the performances that she got out of us were amazing. It was amazing. I was shocked, just shocked. Yeah. So it was a good time. Yeah, it was a good time.
For those kinds of performances, I mean, one of the things that strikes me about the wire rope is that it's a material that has a lot of potential movement or suggestion of movement within it because of the way it's coiled and when you uncoil it, and even in the sculpture that we have now, it has this impression of being blown back
right
by wind.
The one that you have is all unwound.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I just wondered, do you see any, did you take inspiration from the dance and the movement and performance, what you were able to do in dance when you were thinking about making sculpture?
Well, I guess I must have. I mean, I was doing it all at the same time, more or less.
Right.
And it was in my consciousness. It was in my body. It was, part of my practice was to take dance classes. So, yeah. I guess I always think about motion, though, because it's, it's just something that living creatures do. They move. Yeah. And it's very dramatic motion.
Yeah. And of course, motion is such an important part of nature. And you were also speaking about nature and the role of nature in your art and how important. I mean, and even a while ago when you were talking about coming to Bennington and the fact that it was in the country. I mean, have you always? It sounds like you've always had a strong connection to nature.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of feel like, what else is there? There's people and there's nature. In New York, of course, there's lots of sidewalks, but there are parks, and the people in New York revere parks. They love them, love them. They're in them all the time, doing all kinds of things, and I think it's within our nature as human beings to love nature. I think it is going back to that thing I said about the original garden, which I suppose one could say something like, oh, well, that's just a myth. There's nothing to that. But I mean, some of the oldest bones, I think the oldest bones have been found in Africa, in the midst of which, for many, 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 many years, it was a dense forest. And I don't think that biblical references to Eden and Adam and Eve are that far off the mark. I mean, those stories come from someplace. And I think they come from some kind of experience that was overwhelming, that got passed down and passed down and passed down. And that there's truth at the root of it.
Right. Which is why we still tell them, and they still are passed down.
That's why they're so powerful.
Well, I was also wondering, I mean, collaboration has been, we were just talking about performance and dance, but your artwork, a number of performance works, also involves sculpture. And I mean, I'm just thinking about some of the more recent projects you've done involving newspapers, for example.
Oh, yeah.
And I wonder if you see do you see I mean, maybe you want to just describe some of those a little bit and talk about what kind of connection you see between them and the sculptures with wire rope.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'll start with another story from my childhood that has really affected me.
Mm-hmm.
I was a campfire girl. My grandmother was a leader, and my mother assisted, and then she also belonged to the to the organization. She did something within the organization that was a leadership role. Mm-hmm. Not necessarily with our group of girls, but in a capacity in the office. Mm-hmm. And we had summer camp, and we made sit-up-ons out of newspaper in summer camp. And at the end of the day, we would come together and sing songs in a kind of powwow situation. Campfire Girls is really based on Native American lore. Mm-hmm. And there was something about those end of day gatherings and the songs and the conversation. I always remembered them. And I don't know exactly how it happened, but I found myself making a sit-up-on as an adult, accomplished, in quotes, artist. I made a sit-up-on. And I made it out of the New York Times, which is the newspaper I had. And then I realized it was the newspaper of record for the United States. And then I looked at this sit-up-on and I thought, this contains all of us because it's got the New York Times. It's made of the New York Times. It's all of us. So then I started making a lot of them and stacking them up. And then I would, as a child, we all sat on them. They were flat as pancakes, basically, because we were just sitting on one. But then I would make stacks and stacks of them, like 20, and then I'd sit on that. And that was really different than sitting on one. Mm-hmm. And then I figured, well, if I'm sitting on 20 of these, there's so many people, there's so many voices involved in the pages that, made it possible for them to publish, for me to put this all together. And so it became like a stand-in for populations, worldwide populations. And, the comfort of sitting down in a kind of squishy. And so I've shown them in a few places, and I was invited people to sit with me and have conversations with me. And in a couple places I was able to do that. But in most places in museums, they don't have the insurance to make that possible. So, but they would say it would be okay if I came and sat. So sometimes I came and sat and had conversations with people who were standing up in front of me, Right. But that was okay too, because they were like, well, why are you doing this? Well, what is that? Well, why is that art? That couldn't be art. Look at this, look at you. So, but it was nice to have a dialogue,
Right. Well, and we were also talking before the pandemic about you coming to Dallas, and we will talk about this again when things get better. But we were talking about an event also involving newspapers, possibly, and that's making, I think, chains with newspapers.
Well, I did two things with newspaper. Mm-hmm. I either folded it into strips and wove it into sit-up-ons, or I tore it into strips, twisted those torn strips, attached them to the same, like almost like a curtain rod type of idea. And then they would hang down like curtains. And they made lovely sounds, the rustling of the papers. And, you know, after a while they dry out. They don't, none that I've made in the last 10 years are really brown or destroyed or anything. They're just kind of a little bit crunchy.
Mm-hmm. Oh, and they put we had an image of them from the film that they were able to pull out and toss up while you were talking about them. Well, I look forward. I hope we are able to do something like that in the future. I see starting to get in a couple of questions here. And there's one that's relevant to what we're discussing. I think it's maybe better as a two-part question. One is, are you still working with wire rope?
Yes.
Okay, and also there were a couple of images in the video of works showing sculptures woven from tree branches, and the question was the connection between those kind of sculptures from tree branches and the use of the wire rope.
Oh, that's a good question. The first time I used the tree branches, I found like maybe the wind had blown or something and it blew down a few very large branches. And I hung the branches on a wall, and then I wove the wire rope in them. So it almost looked like this silvery river that was running through them. And so I combined them like that. Then later on, I started using the branches without the wire rope. Just as a, wood, but not manufactured wood, natural wood. And then I made a big piece for the Studio Museum in Harlem at a park here in New York, like actually in my neighborhood, only about, 10 or 12 blocks away. And those things I called monuments because I felt like they were somehow monuments to a nature that we were losing or not paying enough attention to, or that's in the process of change and all of that. And we had to hire two fellows to go out every day and find, call up various parks and other resources and with their huge truck go and pick them up like 2 or 3 loads a day. And the Studio Museum sponsored a lot of people to come and help. And so we just started weaving really the branches into a support structure of wire mesh. Yeah.
And what happened to those sculptures at the end of, or how long were they on display outdoors, and then what happened?
They were there for several months, I think, throughout. We put it up in the summertime, early summer, and they went all the way through until snowfall, I think. But then they had to be taken down, and some of them have been recreated in other places. Yeah.
And another question, someone was wondering what artists were important to you when you were developing your own work, whether, say, somebody like Eva Hess or other women artists in particular were interesting to you.
Well, when I was in college at Bennington, it was like Anthony Caro, Isaac and many of Isaac's cohorts from London, who I had only seen their work really in catalogs. And David Smith, we went to visit David Smith's home. The usual suspects for the mid-60s. Mm-hmm. And then when I, came back to LA and I was involved in fibers, Magdalena Bakanowicz, of course, and mm-hmm. many others who were doing large-scale fiber experiments. And also, of course, Eva Hess. And mainly I was very interested in people like Eva Hess because of minimalism and the way that minimalism used repetition. Mm-hmm. And if there's something about fiber that everybody should know is it's all about repetition. Anytime you build anything, and it's with fiber, you have to keep doing it again and again and again. So that interested me, that repetition. And who else? I guess in my learning period time, those were the people. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that's interesting what you say about repetition, both for minimalism and for working in textiles. And I think for somebody who doesn't do that, or who isn't an artist or maybe know much about art, that might sound boring. So I wonder, is boredom an aspect, or what happens in that process of, because there's process of repetition and making?
Yeah. Well, it is a meditative thing after a while to keep mm-hmm. doing the same thing over and over again, which is very soothing. It can be very soothing. But I think the main thing about it is basically our lives are filled with repetition. We get up, if we work, we get up at the same time. We get the alarm at the same time. We brush our teeth. We eat 3 meals a day. We go to the grocery store. Everything. Mm-hmm. We wash our clothes. At work, we're typing up things if we work in that kind of job, or talking on the phone to the same people all the time, life is repetition. Mm-hmm. There's no doubt about it. I mean, it's too chaotic otherwise. Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, perhaps art is a way of, or one way of making the repetition, as you said, more of a meditative or positive element than.
Yeah, it's really kind of nice when I'm making those twisted newspaper pieces mm-hmm. hanging from the wall, and I'm just sitting there, hour after hour after hour. It's pretty crazy, but I mean, there's something about it. I don't know. You're doing something that's connected to the universe of things. I don't know. I don't know any other way of describing abject repetition.
Well, there's an artist I've done some work on, Jean Arp, mm-hmm. who was talking about repetition and in nature, and said if you look at a field of flowers, that's repetition, and we don't mind that when we right. see repetition in nature in that sense.
That's right. Every blade of grass is necessary for that lawn.
Mm-hmm. And actually, that leads me to, before we are starting to wrap up our time, I wanted to also mention repetition. I think reminds me of that. Is it you also? I've seen drawings. You also make drawings, and those also involve, if I'm remembering correctly, repetitions of words. Is that?
Yeah, I have done drawings which are like musings, I guess. They're like thinking about the issue of love and then, just writing love, 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 love. And, I don't know if you can see it on my phone, but now it won't do it, right? Of course it won't do it. Oh, dear. Well, when it goes back, the screensaver says rivers repeatedly. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I may have seen, and I think you rain, maybe.
Rain is probably another one. Okay, I did a wire rope piece called Rain as well, which is a repetition of four hanging elements. Yeah.
I'm just checking. I have another question that. Oh, this is interesting. Now you were director at the Reinhardt Graduate School of Sculpture at the Maryland Institute of Art. And the question concerns whether what role being a teacher played in your or an educator played in your art practice.
Well, I think it was large, really, because it meant that I could earn my living by thinking about art all the time. And I got to think about it in pretty disparate ways because I had different students doing different things and having different ideas and coming from different countries and backgrounds and ages and genders. And, it was all over the place. And it was really fun. And I really enjoyed it. And it required strength, it did. I mean, it was really quite full time.
And partly the strength to be able to continue were you able to continue your own work?
I did, like summers, holidays, things like that. Or if a show was coming up, then I would take time and, do it, stay up all night or whatever I had to do it. It was good. It's really a good life to be able to teach what you're obsessed with, And I think it's okay for the students too, because so many of the students are really taken with art, but they don't know how in the world they're going to survive being an artist. And they could look to me for an example, And I always thought if I could do it, then anybody could do it because wow, And it's very, very nice now that I've retired to hear from them, through emails and letters and stuff, and to see some of them working and, having shows. Yeah.
Yeah, that's wonderful.
It is.
And speaking of having shows, I believe you've also may have a show coming up. I believe a gallery show at your gallery.
Too quick. So it's going to be at the end of April. We're into March, right?
Almost, yes, practically.
It'll be at the end of April, the last week in April. So I have started. I have my ideas together. I've got some armatures that I've had made that I'm working with. And I have a wonderful team of people helping me. And
that's exciting though, because it's going to be, I mean, it's maybe it feels too exciting right now, but it's going to be great.
It's not new. Too exciting. I'm too worried
exactly.
to be too excited.
Yeah. Well, but it's new work as opposed to, I know artists who were going to have shows before the pandemic started, and they've had it postponed, and they had the work made, and it's been just I think they're going to show what they had made so a year ago. So I think this is we'll look forward to it anyway, but
Well,
especially now.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I've been thinking about what I was going to make for a long time,
Mm-hmm.
and making drawings and stuff. And then I sent the drawings to a former student, Mike Benavinia, who his work was welded steel, and he made the forms to the sizes that I wanted.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like magic. It was just magical, you know.
Mm-hmm. That's great.
Yeah. So now Josh Leff is helping me put that together and get that done. And also my number one right-hand assistant, Julia. Without Julia, I'd probably be, I don't know where I'd be. It's important to realize with sculpture, you do not do it alone. It doesn't matter. You cannot do it alone. Cannot. Unless it's, going to be this big.
Right.
Yeah. But even then, you're probably going to take it to somebody to cast or carve or something. Yeah.
Well, we need, so just another, an illustration of needing people in our lives. And I think we're coming to the end of our time together. Maren, I really appreciate your taking time out to talk with me and share with everybody who's been tuning in. Thoughts. Mm-hmm.
I really enjoyed your curatorial practice and your decisions about how we were going to present this. And I enjoyed that very much. Yeah.
Oh, thank you. It's been, I look forward to some more exchanges in the future.
Yeah, it would be nice to get to Dallas. I haven't been to Dallas in a really long time.
Wow.
And I remember liking it. But that was really a long time ago.
Well, I think you'll like it still. So
okay.
you are welcome, and I believe we will be wrapping up this evening. And Anna Smith, our curator of education, may be coming back for a little bit of information, or maybe. So I will go ahead and say my goodbyes for now, and
bye.
Thank you again. Yes. All
right. I had to unmute myself. So thanks again for joining us this evening. We're so pleased that Maren and Catherine could share that wonderful conversation with us. The short video from the top of our program will be available to watch and share through the Nasher's YouTube channel starting tomorrow. And the recording of this conversation will follow shortly thereafter with first access offered to Nasher members. You can see Field, the gorgeous artwork that we were so fortunate to acquire in person as part of the exhibition Nasher Mixtape, which will be on view at our downtown Dallas location through September 26th. I hope you all have a wonderful evening, and we look forward to seeing you at future programs.
Thank you.